He rose from a soldier to a president, then crowned himself emperor. Luxury, power. That man was John Bedel Bokassa. Born on the 22nd of February, 1921, he really never had anything. He came from a really poor family and was one of 12 children. At just the age of 6, he would lose his father after he was beaten to death for refusing to follow French orders. His mother, being unable to bear the grief of his father's death, would take her own life just a week later, leaving Bokassa an orphan at just the age of 6. This left him to be raised by his extended family and missionaries, and in 1939, after taking some advice from his grandfather, he would join the French colonial troops. Bokassa would find great success during his military career, rising up the ranks and increasing his status. He would serve in the Second World War and go from corporal to sergeant major during this time. Afterwards, he would attend officer training in Senegal and would be deployed to French Indochina in 1950. During his stay, he married a 17-year-old Vietnamese girl. Strange for a man in his late 20s, early 30s to marry a 17-year-old girl, but this just shows his abuse of power. In a country where no one could say no to him, even underage girls weren't safe from his authority. By the time he returned, he would become second lieutenant in 1956, and by 1961, he would be a captain. After the Central African Republic gained independence in 1960, being the cousin of David Dacko, the president, Bokassa was given the task of creating the military for the new country. Big mistake putting such power in the hands of a man like Bokassa. A year later, he would become commander-in-chief of the 500 soldiers in his new army. And due to his relationship with Dacko and his experience aboard, he would rise through the ranks, becoming colonel in 1964. Bokassa was known to seek recognition and attention, frequently seen in public wearing military decorations, displaying his importance. He would also sit next to Dacko during ceremonies, displaying his status in the government to the world. Officials in the government would catch on to this really fast and considered Bokassa a threat to Dacko's presidency. But David himself found his cousin's antics to be amusing. You would think that with the number of coups going on in Africa at the time, a person in Dacko's position would be wary of Bokassa's every move. But at an official dinner, Dacko would state, "Bokassa only wants to collect medals, and he is too stupid to pull off a coup." A statement that would come back to bite him in the leg. In 1965, Dacko's government was facing some problems. The economy was stagnant, rebels constantly breached the border, and corruption just added to the list of problems. Bokassa felt that he needed to take over to address these issues. Tensions between Dacko and Bokassa would rise exponentially, and after learning that Dacko planned to replace him, he launched a coup on the 31st of December, 1965. He would head to the Renaissance Palace in order to arrest Dacko, but upon arrival, he was nowhere to be found. Bokassa panicked, thinking that someone had informed the president about the coup. He immediately ordered for his search. When he was found, he was taken back to the palace, and Bokassa would hug him and say, "I tried to warn you, but now it's too late." Dacko was thrown in jail, and Bokassa had successfully taken over. The early days of his regime were marked by Bokassa engaging in self-promotion, flashing his French army medals to countrymen. He always tried to display his strength and masculinity to the public. His presidency was also marked with false promises, with one being his promise to hold elections, but none were ever held in his 13-year rule. False promises weren't all though. He would impose a number of new rules that were kinda odd. For example, men and women between the ages of 18 and 55 had to prove that they had jobs, or else they would be fined or imprisoned. He also banned begging altogether. I wonder what he thought homeless people would do instead. The most unusual one was the banning of tom-tom playing during the week and at night. A brigade was even formed to monitor bars and dance halls. Bokassa would engage in extravagant spending during his presidency, to the point that even his second-in-command, his right-hand man, Banza, would oppose it. Banza had served with Bokassa in the First Indochina War, had partaken in the coup with Bokassa, making them close enough to trust each other. But being the only person to criticize Bokassa, their friendship soured really quickly. By 1967, trust had evaporated between them, with Bokassa viewing Banza as a rival rather than a friend. In 1969, Banza had been demoted from Minister of Finance to Minister of Health. Feeling undermined, he decided to stage a coup, telling his plans to Lieutenant John Cloud Mandaba. However, Mandaba remained loyal to Bokassa and alerted the president to the plot. On April 9, 1969, Banza arrived at Camp Kasai with the coup plans literally in his pocket, only to be ambushed by Mandaba and his forces. The capture was so brutal that the soldiers had to break his arms to subdue him. He was thrown in the trunk of a Mercedes and driven to Bokassa's house. Bokassa was jubilant at the sight of his former friend in chains and began beating him with his walking stick while interrogating him. On April 12th, he was sentenced to death by firing squad. Some sources like Time and Le Monde reported even more gruesome details, claiming Banza was slashed with razors by Bokassa, then dragged through the streets before he was shot. This marked the transition from a shared military rule to a totalitarian dictatorship. Over time, Bokassa became increasingly unpredictable, leading to multiple assassination attempts on him and coups during the 70s. In 1977, Bokassa crowned himself emperor in a ceremony that cost about $20 million, which was one-third the country's annual budget. The coronation was largely inspired by Napoleon. His regalia, the lavish nature, everything. Bokassa attempted to justify this, claiming that a monarchy would help the country stand out, gaining the world's respect. Despite generous invitations, no foreign leaders would attend the event. Even Idi Amin found a reason to refuse the invitation. Rumors that Bokassa ate human flesh were rampant, with his chef stating he had human carcasses stored in the palace's walk-in freezer that he repeatedly cooked for Bokassa. Moreover, Bokassa reportedly told the French ambassador that the latter had eaten human meat at his coronation. By 1979, French support for Bokassa completely eroded after food riots led to the massacre of civilians in Bangui. The final straw came when he tried to force all students in the country, elementary to university, to wear uniforms made by a company owned by his wife. Students protested against Bokassa, and many of them were shot dead by police. Some students who had been taken to prison were beaten to death by the guards. After this event, Bokassa was condemned by foreign governments, and foreign aid was cut off. Bokassa would be overthrown by France on the 21st of September 1979, and David Dacko proclaimed the fall of the CIE and its restoration under his presidency. Bokassa fled to Ivory Coast, where he spent 4 years living, then moved to France, where he was given political asylum due to his service in the French army. He returned to the Central African Republic and was sentenced for 14 different charges, including murder, embezzlement, and cannibalism. He was sentenced to death in 1987, but in 1988, the death penalty was voided against him by Kolingba. In 1993, Bokassa was released after Kolingba declared amnesty for all prisoners. Bokassa remained in the Central African Republic, and in 1996, he died of a heart attack at his home at the age of 75. He had 17 wives and a reported 50 children. Bokassa lived a life of extreme power and cruelty. He died in exile, but his story remains a lesson. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.